I now want to turn to our guest, Vina Nadjibulla. She is the Vice President of Research and Strategy with the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Vina, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning from Vancouver, Natasha.
Hello, Vina. Okay, this story is moving so quickly, and I must admit, for many, it's confusing. So let's begin with your initial assessment of this declaration of martial law being brought forward, again in the middle of the night, by the South Korean president.
Absolutely. It's a shocking development. There's no other way to describe it. South Korea has experienced martial law in the past, but not since it became a full-fledged liberal democracy in the 80s. So this is really an unusual, unprecedented development. It's important to note that there is no immediate threat from North Korea. At least that's not the reason why this has happened, and that's important given the context in the region. This is very much about a domestic power struggle and a deeply unpopular president essentially bringing in this measure in the midst of a number of debates in its domestic parliament on the budget, as well as scandals, including with his own wife and other issues that have been plaguing democracy and the constitutional system in South Korea for the last few months.
Vina, I wonder if I could get your assistance in some clarity at this moment, because the president comes out and declares martial law. Then the parliament resumes just a few hours later, and this latest information coming from Reuters, this is South Korea's National Assembly Speaker, Woon Won-sik, and he is saying, I declare that 190 were present and all 190, which is members of the parliament, voted in favor of a motion demanding the lifting of the emergency martial law. So who has the final say, the president or the parliament?
Right. So based on South Korea's constitution, the president does have an authority to declare martial law, but parliament can ask him to lift it. And that is what parliament has done. It is really incredible because all of this has happened in the span of just a few hours, as you noted. The president made his surprise declaration late in the evening, and about 3 hours later, Parliament assembled, even though not all of them were able to enter the building because the building had been barricaded by the military and police. But the 190 of them that entered, which is enough in terms of majority, did unanimously pass a bill saying that they called on the president essentially to lift it. So now we're in a constitutional crisis. We don't know what the president will do next, what his next move will be. When he declared the martial law, he also appointed the chief of army as the commander. But we haven't really seen any actions taking place. Ordinarily, under a martial law, you would have a suspension of a lot of media outlets. Obviously, parliament will be suspended, all of that. But of course, this is a chaotic situation with things developing as we speak.
Okay, and I just want to highlight for folks at home something very important that you said, which is they voted in favor to ask the president to lift the martial law. That doesn't necessarily mean the president is going to do it. You acknowledge that this is now a constitutional crisis for South Korea. Yes. So in actual terms, what does that mean for South Koreans?
I mean, it's really an unusual situation. Of course, older Koreans would remember things like this from the 70s, last time around when there was a martial law, but younger Koreans have lived in a democracy. We're seeing a number of them already protesting and really calling on the president to end this. Of course, they're also calling for his impeachment. There have been protests for weeks now in Seoul because the president and his policies are unpopular. But we will see what sort of happens, particularly with the army, whether or not the army actually chooses to use force against the protesters or parliamentarians. That would be a massive escalation. We, of course, hope that that doesn't happen because again, Korea is an important democracy in the Indo-Pacific, a key ally of the United States, a major partner for Canada. This has massive implications, obviously, for South Korea and South Koreans, but also for international relations and for the region.
We are also hearing from local reporting that we're hearing from the Speaker of the Parliament that the soldiers are actually leaving the area. So much is in flux so quickly, Vina. Let's move forward with the assumption that the president is not going to lift the declaration of martial law. What does the Constitution say about that? He has the authority to do so. So what are the possible outcomes then? You sort of touched on them, but let's take it to its full extent.
Yes, I mean, of course, the most important thing that we're watching right now is whether or not there's going to be violence on the streets. And it is really good news, as you're noting, that at least the images that we're seeing is that the police and the army are not stepping in and there is no escalation. So that's critical, and that's what everybody's going to be watching. The next element is what's going to happen in this power struggle in Parliament. It was surprising to see the president declaring martial law, even when his own party, so his own party leader said that he doesn't support it. So it really is quite a desperate act in some ways. Mm-hmm. And of course, the parliament can call for the impeachment of the president. There have been many efforts already underway. So, I mean, it's hard for me to see how many moves President Yoon has left apart from escalation and violence, which would be really unfortunate and obviously something that international partners, including the U.S., would be strongly urging against.
Vina, President Yoon has also accused the opposition of being sympathetic to North Korea. Is there any validity to that accusation?
So this is a deep issue within Korean politics, and President Yoon is a hardliner. He's very much, he's a former prosecutor, and his political career has been very much hard on North Korea, on what he calls sympathizers in the opposition party towards North Korea. And of course, in his speech, he used some very strong language in terms of eliminating those kind of anti-state actors. This is deeply concerning. The opposition, of course, had been critical of him for his authoritarian tendencies. There's a lot of tensions, both in parliament but also in public, with respect to the policies that the president had put in place, his domestic politics. Here in Canada and in the US, elsewhere, we had focused in the last couple of years on his foreign policy, which many welcomed, including close relations with Japan, closer relations with Western allies, stronger position against China and North Korea. But domestically, things have been much more complicated, much less popular among the people, cost of living issues, healthcare issues, and the president has really not addressed them in a way that has been satisfactory to the people.
So we can understand from a domestic perspective how problematic the relationship would be with the president and the public, and certainly after this martial law move. But if we return to the wider perspective of international affairs, I mean, how should Western allies respond to this?
It's been interesting to see that so far, at least last I checked, the U.S. has said that it's closely monitoring the situation and is in conversation with Korean authorities. I haven't seen anything from Canada, but again, U.S. is South Korea's closest ally. There are over 28,000 American troops stationed in Korea, of course, in the context of dealing with the North Korean threat. For Canada, South Korea is our closest partner in the region next to Japan. We have a strategic partnership. We have deep diplomatic, political, economic relations. Obviously, we have a South Korean diaspora here in Canada as well. So this will have ramifications for our bilateral relationship as well as for the region. South Korea is a key player when it comes to dealing with the China threat, obviously, as well as North Korea. And I'll have to remind you, and of course, we all have been watching what's been happening with North Korea in Ukraine. So there's escalation of tensions on the Korean peninsula. There's greater nuclear threat from North Korea, both to South Korea as well as Japan. So this political crisis, this constitutional crisis, and this huge challenge to South Korea's democracy is coming at a really difficult time when it comes to regional dynamics. It's also coming at a time of political transition in the U.S., so lots of factors to consider.
Vina, so good to have you on the show. So good to get your perspective. Let's see how the story develops, and I hope we can chat again.
Thanks so much, Natasha.
Our pleasure. Vina Nadjibulla joining us now.